DANConversations. Garnet Henderson, interviewed by Rebecca Margolick.
Hello, community. We are really excited to have you on with us today. For those who may not know, this is Garnet Henderson. She is one of our DANC members. She is a dance artist based in NYC and is also a brilliant freelance journalist writing for publications like Vice, The Atlantic, Glamour, Wired, and Dance Magazine, which I'm sure you've read her writing in before. She hosts a vitally important podcast called Access, and a podcast about abortions, which is a podcast that talks openly and unashamedly about abortions in the US. Garnet, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Garnet Henderson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman zooming in from Lenape lands, currently known as Inwood, Upper Manhattan. I am wearing a pinkish purple turtleneck. I have my hair up on top of my head in a top knot and white earbuds. And behind me, you can kind of see my living room. There's a couch and two windows with plants hanging in one of the windows.
Awesome. And my name is Rebecca Margolick. I use she, her pronouns. I am zooming in from the Coast Salish territories, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And I am a white woman with long brown hair. I'm like, where am I? I have a yellow wall behind me, a white door to my left, and I'm wearing a dark red sweater. Awesome. So Garnet, I was wondering, why did you first join DANC and how has your experience been with the group?
I had heard a lot about DANC and wanted to be involved, but hadn't been able to make it to a meeting until right before the pandemic. I don't remember exactly what month it was, but I went to basically one in-person DANC meeting, I think right before everything shut down, and then was able to stay involved over Zoom. I've loved being involved with DANC during the pandemic because it's a nice way to still feel connected to dancing and the dance community when I probably feel more disconnected from my identity as a dancer and my work as a dancer than really ever before in my life, which is really sad and really hard. So it's been nice to find community with other dancers, and it's been really nice to connect with other dancers who are interested in challenging the status quo in the field, and no longer willing to accept the frankly terrible working conditions that we're pretty much all just conditioned to accept from the time, I think, as dancers, we're quite young. So yeah, I've really enjoyed finding that community and kind of an outlet for some of that justified anger, which hopefully I am channeling in a productive way with DANC.
I feel that. It's hard not to let it burst out sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Very jealous you got to go to some in-person meetings. Unfortunately, I can't wait till we can get together in person.
Yeah, I know. It'll be great.
And so if you wouldn't mind giving us like a brief overview of your experience, history within the dance field, that would also be great to kind of know where you're coming from.
Sure. I'm a dancer and choreographer. So mostly in my professional life, I have danced in my own work. I usually always dance in my own work. I play that role of choreographer and dancer. And then I've also danced with other folks on a freelance basis. I have actually gotten to do a little dancing during the pandemic. I danced in a film project with Mark Dendy that should be coming out soon. Was going to perform with Colleen Thomas at New York Live Arts in March, I think. So that was one of those shows that got canceled. So yes, a freelancer, but mostly actually dancing in my own work.
Nice. Yeah, it's a hard, I do something similar. I do a lot of solo work. So I'm both playing that role, and it is, it's challenging. And I think it's been eye-opening to then see from the choreographer perspective, kind of those barriers as well. Yeah, it's a challenging role to juggle, I find.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially as an independent artist. I mean, that's one thing I think a lot about in DANC when we're talking about working conditions and living wage, because I do always pay people who dance for me, because I don't believe in asking anyone to work for free. But as an independent choreographer, that usually just means that I don't get paid, and in fact usually lose money when I am presenting my own work. So yeah, I'm really happy to be advocating on behalf of dancers within DANC. Of course, many of us are also choreographers, but I'm also really excited about the work of groups like Creating New Futures that I think are coming at it more from the angle of how presenters interact with and commission choreographers, directors, producers.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually been thinking about that recently. And I, especially being, you know, I work in Canada and the US.
Mm-hmm.
And just now I've never really like gone through funding or presenting, just like a little bit of experience in the US. But there's a different like structure here. At least it's much easier as an independent, not 501c3 artist to get funding. Like you have access to funding. And I find in New York especially, you're always going through organizations to get that funding. And I'm like, and I think there's a lot of like work that we can do from the choreographer level to also like hopefully change the structures of access to funding and finances, so that we're not always needing to be like curated from an organization. Yeah, I've just been thinking about this recently because I'm like, there's a reason that like independent choreographers are having such a hard time in New York as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I described the structure of fiscal sponsorship to a friend of mine who is not an artist, and he was like, "Is that legal?" So, and it is, but yeah, that to me is that's a really big problem. I mean, I know that a lot of foundations have as just kind of something that was set up in their structure that they can only dispense money to 501c3s, which means if you're an independent artist, you have to get fiscally sponsored. But that is something that I really would like to see change, because fiscal sponsorship costs money. You know, usually there's an annual fee and a cut that comes out of whatever donations you receive, which when you're already receiving meager funds is frankly ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, especially the combination of the annual fee and a cut taken out of every donation or in some cases grants that you receive. And I would really like to see that change, because frankly, I think it's a little bit insulting. It kind of suggests that artists aren't capable of, you know, managing money and making good decisions for themselves. And also that the only expenses that should be paid for are like materials and subcontractors, and that there's somehow something wrong with just giving money directly to artists.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's so well said. It's right. And then you become a part of this nonprofit industrial complex, and you can't make your work. Yeah, it's a huge barrier. I think it's actually like, it's something maybe, oh, there's so much to work on, but this is something
I know.
work on. Oh, so many things. This pandemic has radicalized a lot of us. So I just also wanted to talk to you about your podcast. I've listened to a few episodes, and I've always been very interested in reproductive justice, and it's something I care a lot about from personal experience as well. And so I was wondering, what kind of sparked you to start creating this podcast?
Well, I've been a freelance journalist since before I graduated from college. And I started mainly writing about dance, which I still do, although I branched out into writing more about health and then also about other cultural topics. And I also always had a big personal interest in reproductive health, and I knew a lot about it. And so several years ago, I realized that I should really make that a focus of my reporting, that I should use that personal knowledge I have for my journalism work. And so I started reporting a lot on various reproductive health topics, but especially abortion access. And one of the biggest things that I learned from that is that most people really just don't know very much about abortion. It's really hard to write an article about abortion that's not really long, because there's so much context, particularly in the US, that needs to be included to even make sense of whatever news story that you're trying to report. Anti-abortion laws in the United States are really convoluted, and they involve all these just arcane little details that make it really difficult for people to get abortions. And that's by design. It's intended to be confusing. It's intended to just be this insurmountable mess that effectively makes abortion illegal in a lot of states, even though technically there is a constitutional right to abortion for many people. That really just doesn't exist in practice. And I even found, a lot of editors, because as a freelancer, I pitch most of the articles I write. So sometimes editors approach me with an idea that they have and just ask me to write it. But usually I'm pitching my ideas to editors and trying to convince them basically that this is an article that they want to publish. And I've been lucky to work with a few amazing editors who already knew a lot about abortion, but most don't. And so I would spend so much time, talk about unpaid labor. A lot of the stories that I published involved months of back and forth conversation between me and an editor, just with me trying to explain why this is important and why it needs to be published. So that was my idea for the podcast, basically, was to fill in all that context that people don't usually have, because abortion is so heavily stigmatized that a lot of people just never talk about it, including people who generally consider themselves to be supportive of abortion access or the right to have an abortion. And so I wanted to really break it down, have each episode cover a different topic. And then I was also attracted to audio as a medium, just because I wanted listeners to really be able to hear people's voices. I wanted to bring the audience comprehensive and factual information, but I also really wanted to highlight people's personal experiences with abortion. And I think it's really powerful to actually hear people in their own words, describe their own abortion experience and what it was like for them and how they feel about it and how other people made them feel about it.
I was going to segue into that, because I think one thing that I've really appreciated about your podcast is like you letting your guests tell their stories. And I think you're obviously talking about like access and justice and legislation and laws, but the stories somehow take it, like, just to hear a story is also really important, because it kind of takes it out of this like super divisive political space, and you just like listen to someone's experience. And I find that really impactful and powerful, and also very affirming, because I think like I find that when I talk about it, I want to just be like, yes, it was great, and like everyone should have this chance, and like nobody wants to talk about like maybe how hard it was, or like, so I feel like there's something really like freeing about like opening up the conversation for people to tell their stories. And yeah, I was just wondering kind of like what, I guess you already basically answered it, but like what specifically was it about like having people on to really just tell their stories? Is there any like process to that, or how do you find people?
Yeah, well, part of the reason why I really wanted to have people share their personal stories is that abortion is incredibly common. In the United States, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion during her lifetime, and trans men and non-binary people have abortions as well, and they face even greater barriers to abortion care. So what that means is that everyone knows someone who's had an abortion, if they haven't had one themselves. And in fact, you probably know multiple people who've had abortions. You just might not know because they might not have felt comfortable telling you.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, I really wanted to center the experiences of people who've had abortions in the podcast, because I do think we just don't often hear from them. We hear a lot of people talk about abortion who have not had abortions, a lot of politicians and pundits expressing opinions about abortion that are not grounded in any kind of personal experience. And I really didn't want my podcast to be like Garnet's opinions on abortion. I really wanted to let people speak for themselves. I think that's really important. And it's something that is missing in a lot of media coverage of abortion, although I do think that's improving overall. And in part, that's improving because of an amazing organization called We Testify that's run by an incredible reproductive justice organizer named Renee Bracey Sherman. And she started this organization that supports people who've had abortions and helps them tell their stories in whatever way they want. And so it's an amazing resource for journalists, because I can basically reach out to Renee and say, I'm doing an episode about later abortion, for example, is one that I did. And she has people who are willing to tell stories about later abortions. So there are a few other similar kind of patient advocate organizations that I've connected with as well to find people. And then one of the things that's been really wonderful is people have actually reached out to me after hearing the podcast and offered to share their stories, which to me is like the highest possible compliment that I could receive on the podcast, is that someone who's personally had an abortion would hear it and feel comfortable talking to me, and want to reach out to me and share their story on the show.
That's amazing. That is, I just wrote that organization down. I want to look that up, because that's really incredible. I know it's funny because I've been in Vancouver for like a few months, or more than a few months now. What day is it? And like all around on the subway, when I've been taking the subway, like there's these posters that are specifically for like post-abortion counseling. And I'm just like, this is so funny. I've never seen that. Like, even in, a pretty liberal place like New York, I've never seen like posters that are dedicated to like care for people who have had abortions, or like organizations that are there for people to talk or receive counseling, or like in a totally non, political way. But it's like it's very interesting. I was just like, wow, like that's also something, to have a place where people can come to afterwards. I'm excited to keep listening to your podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited for some of the episodes I have planned for 2021. So
awesome. I'll have you plug it again at the end.
Okay.
So like many dancers, you are someone who juggles multiple careers, and that's no easy feat. I was wondering kind of if you wouldn't mind talking about that a bit, and what advice, especially at this time when a lot of dancers are starting to think about, being forced in some way with the pandemic to think about other careers, which is sad, but it's a reality. What advice would you give to someone who is exploring and developing another career alongside their dance career like you have done?
Well, it's definitely a huge juggle. I'm also a personal trainer,
Okay.
and that is actually where the bulk of my income comes from. My hope when I graduated from college was always that I would be able to make more and more money from journalism and kind of phase out personal training as I went along. That has become less and less feasible because journalism, in case anyone doesn't know, is basically dying. I mean, major media organizations are having layoffs every few months at this point. Rates I have seen for freelance reporting just get slashed over the years. So it's actually harder, even though I'm now more experienced, it's actually harder to make as much money as I used to make. So that's definitely something I've been dealing with during the pandemic, because I am really fortunate that my personal training clients have pretty much all stuck with me, which of course is because they're all people who are very privileged and still have plenty of money right now. Yeah. So as grateful as I am for that, it does make me feel a little bit trapped in personal training. So yeah, I really empathize with dancers who are trying to figure out what to do and how to make money, because it really sucks right now, to be honest. But what I would say is that dancers have so many skills that are transferable to pretty much any other kind of career. I mean, especially dancers who are freelancers usually are already total pros at, you know, scheduling, fitting things in, making things work however they need to. And dancers are incredibly hard workers and incredibly strong and resilient and smart. You know, I think dance gives you lots of skills that you can transfer to any other career you would want to have. And so I guess the main thing I would just say is know your worth. Like, never let anybody make you feel like because you spent so much of your life training to be a dancer that that's somehow worthless if you're looking into another type of career. Like, that makes you an amazing applicant for whatever job you could be applying for. You know, I mean, to me, there's no better person that you could hire for almost any other kind of job than a dancer. Who else is as diligent, you know, and as detail oriented? So yeah, I think right now it's really hard to make any kind of plans. So I don't know that if I have any advice for that, but I would definitely say, yeah, I think my biggest thing is know your worth. And also remember that there's a lot more money in other industries that does not exist in dance. So clearly, as I said, that's not the case for journalism, but like for personal training, if you're a dancer who decides to become a personal trainer or a Pilates instructor or a yoga teacher, whatever, as many dancers do, you should charge premium rates. I mean, do sliding scale if you want. I always have a few sliding scale clients. I think that's important. But like, yeah, if you're a dancer who's becoming a personal trainer or Pilates instructor, you're already an extremely highly specialized personal trainer or Pilates instructor. Charge premium rates. You're worth it.
That's awesome. I think, because I mean, so many of us do teach, do have private clients or private group classes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true. Like, we have the knowledge about bodies, about interpersonal skills. I think that's one thing I've noticed. I'm like, dancers are so good at working with anyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. It kind of segued into my next question.
Oh, good.
Which is also like, you know, I've found myself, especially transferring into like online spaces and some beginnings of organizing work, advocacy work, with DANC and with other groups. You know, I've heard many other dancers say this, that they struggle from the like imposter syndrome, where you're just like, all of a sudden you're in a new space and you're questioning your like capability and whether you have like transferable skills. And like, as someone who has shown up into journalism, into starting a podcast, like, what are some tips that you would give for dancers who find themselves kind of like questioning their like agency? Yeah.
Well, this is kind of corny, but I think the best advice I ever got from a dance teacher was fake it till you make it. Yes. I had this teacher when I was like 13 who pointed out to me, he was like, you know, Garnet, you always know the combination. And then you stand behind other people and you watch them as if you don't know the combination. And that's what messes you up.
Yep.
But actually, you know the combination. Yeah. So he said, you need to start standing in the front and just dancing. and like fake it till you make it. You know, if you don't feel confident, pretend to feel confident. And I have to say, like I said, maybe it's corny, but I do think that's great life advice, because I think so much of what people perceive as aptitude is really just confidence.
Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't work in all situations, because confidence is never going to magically overcome racism or sexism or other kinds of structural oppression. So I'm definitely not saying like, be confident and you'll have no problems. Everyone will take you seriously all the time.
You'll get paid so much more.
Yeah. But I do think it helps. I mean, I had an easier time getting into journalism, I think, because I actually wrote for my college newspaper in college, which is really where I learned how to be a journalist. And that was enough to get, like I said, to get me kind of started with freelancing even before I graduated. But podcasting definitely made me super nervous, mainly because I, like most dancers, am a huge perfectionist. And it was horrifying to me, the idea that I could make a podcast and it would not be like the best, most perfectly produced podcast ever. And of course it's not going to be the best, because not only is it my first time, it's a pandemic. And so I can't travel and speak to people in person the way I had planned. So like the audio quality when I'm recording people via Zoom or from a phone call is just never going to be what I had planned when I originally kind of laid out my dreams and goals for the podcast. So I guess my other advice would be try to let go a little bit of your dancer perfectionism, because I think that I actually wrote an article about this for Dance Magazine a few months ago.
I gotta find it.
Yeah, I actually think it's coming out in the January issue. I wrote it a few months ago, but I think it should be out soon. Basically about how dancers can harness perfectionism, but not let it hold them back. Because I do think having drive and focus and intention is so helpful. Those are the good parts of perfectionism. But then there's the obsessiveness and the self-criticism that just totally gets in your way. Yeah. So I've been really trying to work on like, when I'm being really critical or freaking out about something not be perfect, I just sort of ask myself, like, what would you say to a friend who was expressing this worry? Like talk to yourself like you talk to your friends is also maybe corny, but I think a very good piece of advice.
No, that's great. That's great. I'm like, I'm a hypocrite. I say great things, advice, or at least I think it's good advice to my friends. But when it comes back to me, I'm like, so that's a really good reminder. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So much. Oh man, I have so much I want to talk to you about. Another thing I wanted to touch on also, because you are very aware of the ins and outs and the barriers to getting what I think is necessary medical treatment, especially around reproductive care and abortions. I was just wondering, and you've sent some great tweets also about the disastrous health system we have here in the US, even in New York State. And I was wondering, like just for you personally, I know you're an advocate and supporter of single payer health insurance and Medicare for all and stuff. And I was wondering how you find that also relating to reproductive justice. It's an abortion care. Like it's something I haven't, because I mostly just know the system in New York, which is covered under like certain insurances, but just kind of curious also like how would Medicare for all change abortion access? I was wondering if you had some information on that.
Yeah, I mean, it would change basically everything, particularly for low-income people and people of color. So there is an amendment called the Hyde Amendment that I think people are much more aware of now than they were even a few years ago. And almost all credit goes to that, actually, to organizers who are women of color, for raising awareness about the Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal funds from being used to pay for abortion.
Right.
So that mainly affects people who are on Medicaid, also the child health insurance program, federal employees, people in the armed forces, and Indigenous people who rely on what is still called the Indian Health Service. That's the federal government program for Indigenous healthcare. So states can choose, and some states have been forced by court order to cover abortions under their Medicaid, because Medicaid is a combination of federal and state funding. So in New York, for example, Medicaid would cover an abortion. In many other states, it would not. Private insurance in New York also covers abortion, although abortion is expensive. And I don't know about you, but my deductible is so high that if I had to go get an abortion tomorrow, I would definitely be paying for it out of pocket, even though I have health insurance. And abortion is expensive. On average, a first trimester abortion costs about $500, but that varies a lot depending on the state and the type of facility that you're going to. So really, I would say it tends to cost anywhere between like $400 and $800. And after the first trimester, basically every week an abortion gets more expensive. So people who need abortions later in pregnancy are often paying thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. Really, a later abortion can be just as expensive as giving birth. So Medicare for all, as long as we also got rid of the Hyde Amendment forever, would completely transform abortion access in the United States, because abortion would be covered for everyone, no matter what. And that would be huge, because right now, most people who have abortions are paying for that out of pocket. More and more states have also banned private insurance coverage of abortion, or specifically, a lot of states have banned marketplace plans from covering abortion. So basically, the only people whose insurance in those states will cover abortion are people who get insurance through work, who are probably already more privileged. So it's a huge problem.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's really clarifying, and also kind of lays out the land of convoluted hellhole that is figuring out your insurance. And I'll just also note that with like, you will all be hearing plenty from me about the New York Health Act soon.
We can't wait to harass our state lawmakers into giving us single payer healthcare.
Oh,
I don't think we're ready.
I'm like, I want to see it happen. I'm going to fight so hard for this. But under that, abortions would be considered necessary and covered, and everyone would be covered under one single plan. Just another reason we got to fight for it. I also wanted to, because I love your Twitter a lot, and I'm new to Twitter. You're one of the few people I'm always like, what is Garnet saying? And I also wanted to touch base, and we'll be closing out soon. And this is starting a whole other conversation. I'm sorry, but I'm opening a can.
No, it's okay. 1 second, Rebecca. They're knocking on my door.
Oh, I'm gonna pause the recording.
1 second. Okay, thank you. Okay.
It's great. We just have a scene change.
Yeah.
Switch it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so my last thing, because I could talk forever. I'm chatty. I wanted to touch base on a tweet you wrote recently. I'll just quote it. Garnet said, "We're about to lose an entire generation of incredible dancers who are going to transition into other careers entirely because they begged for relief that never came. I'd like to see a plan for all these service organizations have for that." I'm thinking about this recently too, in light of the Save Our Stages campaign, which is really important, and our venues need help. But within that, there's no plan or accountability for that money to trickle down into the hands of the workers who make those events. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that you would like to share.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that's been on my mind so much, because like I said, I've been so happy to be organizing with DANC. It's one of the things that has felt really good and hopeful to me during the pandemic. But it's also weird because I have no idea what my life or my career as a dancer looks like after this. It's just so hard for me to imagine going back to what I was doing before. And every day I feel like I see a new announcement from a dancer I know who's, going back to grad school, got some other new kind of job, and maybe some of those people will return to the field. But probably a lot of them won't. I think we're going to lose a lot of incredible dancers who've been left with no other choice but to leave because, like I said, I've been really lucky to continue to have regular work as a personal trainer through the pandemic. So I'm in a much more privileged position relative to a lot of other people in the field. And so I feel like if I'm thinking, I don't know if I can go back to this, I'm sure the dancers who were mostly relying on gigs that all got canceled are thinking, that's it, And it's so frustrating because I think we already know in the US that our government doesn't value art very much. We spend less on art than almost any other, we spend less on art than any other wealthy country. Yeah. And a lot less on art than other countries that have far less wealth than we do. And it's just so frustrating to me that our government didn't step up to provide relief to artists, direct relief to artists. And what's frustrating to me right now is I feel that who's going to survive? It's going to be our biggest and best funded institutions. And we all know that those institutions have their favorite artists, most of whom are white and many of whom already have wealth of their own. And so it just makes me really sad to think that what we might be looking at on the other side of the pandemic is a field that is even more limited, even more exclusionary than it was before, with structural racism in particular, even more deeply entrenched perhaps than it was previously, just because so many dancers of color will have been shut out.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. And it was actually a fellow DANC member, Terashina, who said something that made me think about this. It's hard to watch all of our dance institutions do their year-end giving appeals right now, talking about the resiliency of artists and look at what we've accomplished in this terrible year. And my question is like, okay, what's your plan then to help the actual artists? Because what good really does it do any of us if our institutions survive, but hundreds or thousands of people have to leave the field? Yeah. And we end up with an artistic field that is even smaller and more insular than it was before. I don't see how that benefits artists. I don't see how it benefits our society. So right now, I think I mostly have anger about that, as you probably can hear. But yeah, I'm looking forward to really pushing these institutions, especially the ones that have announced that they got big grants, especially the ones who are gonna raise money, even if it's less than a normal year, because they have wealthy donors. I'm really interested in pressuring them to redistribute that wealth to the artists who need it and not to just fill their own coffers.
That just fire with that. It's I feel the frustration with that, because I think, we know, I forget the exact percentage, but something like with the PPP loans that came out, that went to organizations and nonprofits and institutions, like just a teensy bit of sliver of that trickled down to the artists. And actually many artists themselves were not able to get those loans.
Yep.
So it just shows that we're always begging these places for money. And, another thing that you touched on, which I think is really important, is the lack of government funding. And with the decrease of government funding, that has happened since 2008, I think it is, 2004, 2008. There's been an increase in corporate and board funding. And so you know, money is power. And if you have people with that status having a say of where the money is going, it's already a completely inequitable system and field. So thanks for touching on that as well. I think it's something we're really going to have to fight for, especially as so many artists are leaving cities, and yeah, it's very frustrating. It's like, yeah. And, you know, we're waiting to hear whether we're going to get some unemployment, but we'll see.
I know. Yeah. Or a tiny second stimulus.
Yeah. Yeah, something. Yeah, I would love to see like studios offering, I mean, I know studios are struggling too, so I can't speak for them, but, you know, places that did get loans, maybe offering direct payments or like free rentals, or, you know, just things to get people back into the doors, to actually be able to do the creation of their work. And yeah.
I mean, just one thing I'll say on that front is we have seen a lot of organizations shift to providing direct grants to artists for COVID relief in ways that they don't normally do. And so, kind of going back to what I said earlier, I would love to see that continue, but see that people don't have to demonstrate financial hardship in order to receive those kind of funds, just that becomes more of a norm, that if you're giving an artist a grant, you're just giving them money.
Yep. Yep.
No fiscal sponsors, no limits on how it can be spent.
Yep. Strings attached.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess let's try to end on a more positive note. I'm trying to get my mind off of unemployment, as I just wait to find out what's going to happen. Yeah, I guess, what are you excited about for in the future of DANC, and what are you working on now within DANC? And what would you tell folks who are maybe thinking of joining but not sure yet?
Well, I am getting involved with the internal structure circle in DANC. We're really looking at how DANC should be structured as an organization. I just tried to avoid using the word structure again, but I couldn't. We are looking at how, you know, what kind of bylaws DANC should have, what kind of policies, procedures, how the steering committee should work, how those people should be chosen. I think that's something we've heard a lot of feedback on in meetings. I think that's exciting work, because hopefully it will help DANC become both more inclusive and more sustainable, so that we don't just have a few people, shout out to the steering committee, who are doing a huge amount of work to keep DANC running. I would love to see us get more people in there so that everybody's job is smaller.
Yes,
I think that would be amazing. Yeah, exactly. Avoid the burnout. Keep it realistic and sustainable, make it easier for other people to get involved. And I'm also really excited to work with you on pushing for the passage of the New York Health Act. It passes in the Assembly pretty much every year. It's time to get it passed in the Senate, and either be able to override a veto from Governor Cuomo, or, I don't know, force him to sign it. I don't know if that one will work. So override a veto from Governor Cuomo,
That's gonna end up
who is a Republican who pretends to be a Democrat.
Yeah, let's get this straight.
Yeah. And what I would say to anyone who is thinking about getting involved but hasn't is, please come join DANC. We want your wonderful presence there. We want to hear your ideas. We want to make DANC something that will work for you. And now is a really exciting time. Like I said, now that we're really figuring out how DANC should work on a nuts and bolts level, we're looking for input at whatever level you're able to contribute. So even if you're only able to come to a meeting here or there and offer some thoughts, we love that. Or if you want to get more involved and get into a circle, we love that too.
Awesome. That's so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for speaking with me today. I can't wait to put this out. I could talk for hours about reproductive justice, abortions, politics, the dance field, all of it. You are doing such important work.
Thank you.
I really admire everything you're doing, everything you write, everything you speak about, your presence in meetings, your contributions to DANC. How can one go about listening to your podcast?
You can find my podcast. It's called Access, a podcast about abortion, wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Google, Spotify, Overcast, whatever, wherever you search for it, it should be there. You can also visit the website where you can subscribe, just listen to individual episodes, and that's apodcastaboutabortion.com.
Awesome. I highly recommend listening to it, everyone. It's so good. And also Garnet has like an amazing podcast voice. You sound so good. It's like so soothing.
Thank you. Thank you. I try. You know, that's one area where I really had to let go of my perfectionism, because it takes 10 times longer if I play every single recording back before I go on. So yeah, it's an exercise in being a little kinder to myself.
Which we all can do. We can do that all the time.
Yes.
All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. You will see this soon. We'll also post some clips. If you don't feel like watching the whole thing, you can get little snippets. Come to our next meeting, January 4th. That's a Monday, the first Monday of January, which I believe is January the 4th. And yes, thanks for watching. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you.
Sign our solidarity statement at www.danceartistsnationalcollective.org. Follow us on Instagram at Dance Artists National Collective and on Twitter at DANC National.